Mike Hendren. I'm a local broadcaster and a real estate agent here in Wichita Falls, Texas with Strategic Realty. And this is Lou Italis, the owner-broker of Strategic Realty here in Wichita Falls. Lou, how are you?
Hey.
All right.
Good.
Everything.
Same stuff, different day.
Same stuff, different. Yeah.
I caught myself.
Yeah, it is, man. We work in an industry that is ever changing in some ways, and busy as ever. You know, I was reading something yesterday about so the Fed is meeting to talk about interest rates.
Yeah, that's starting to change a little bit right now.
They're looking at raising the interest rates a little bit to try to tap the brakes on inflation, because inflationary pressures now have hit everybody. And depending on what you're looking at, some of those indicators are we're seeing inflation the highest we've seen in 30 or 40 years.
Ay.
So they're going to tap the brakes a little bit.
My groceries are not having fun.
No, not. And we're lucky here in Texas. We don't pay taxes on groceries here. I know some of you do in some states. We don't here. And that's a blessing in a way, because, man, it sure costs a lot to eat a steak these days. Gosh, it's expensive.
I don't know, but I'd rather pay more in sales tax than federal income tax.
Yeah, I would too, but
they need to get rid of the federal income tax and just create a federal sales tax.
And we've talked about that before. It's a lot of people call it the fair tax.
Oh, yeah.
National sales tax, national consumption tax, however you want to term it.
I'd rather pay 2% of that than any income tax, because, everybody works hard for their money.
Was it Herman Cain, the late Herman Cain, when he ran for president back in 2012, I think it was, or he was running for the Republican nomination. And the guy, literally a rocket scientist. He literally was a rocket scientist. At one time, he was the CEO of Godfather's Pizza as well. And he had a radio talk show for several years too. And he had this plan. He called it the 999 plan. It was a 9% income tax, 9% sales tax, and something else. Anyways, I remember 3 nines is what I remember. But the idea is that you would eliminate all deductions, you would eliminate all of the stuff that we do now,
all the legal crap,
and everybody would pay. Everybody, whether you made $25,000 a year or $250,000 a year, you paid, and that was the idea. And he kind of.
I still don't agree. I don't agree that we should be taxing people on their income.
Yeah.
Because that's a way to discourage a lot of people from working. People don't operate on. Well,
certainly investment.
On that kind of.
If the whole you get to a point to where the more you earn, the more they take, and it's like.
Yeah, then you lose your motivation, because if you work hard, the dream is that you're going to be able to make it in this country. But if you're working hard and all of a sudden you're starting to pay all this money and taxes, then that kind of puts a little bit of a break on you.
And we're in an industry in real estate where we really count on people wanting to invest money. Whether you're buying a home for your personal residence, or whether you're buying it, for income property, investment property, it's an investment one way or another. Even when you're buying your home, whether it's going to be your forever home or somewhere where you're going to, sit and play for the next 7 or 10 years or whatever, it's an investment. It is.
And I don't think people really understand that it's the reward versus punishment.
Yeah.
So if you're rewarding people for working hard by not charging them by not charging them income tax, then they're going to work harder. And the reward is that you can buy things that you want.
Yeah.
And you're willing to pay for it at that point.
Yeah.
I have no problem paying sales tax whenever it comes to, purchasing the items that I want. If I want it, I'm going to pay for that.
Well, I think I may have mentioned to you off the air the other day, but there's a really good book out there about this that Neil Bortz wrote several years ago. It's probably 20 years ago now, called The Fair Tax Book. And it really it lays out the case for it, how it would work and why it would work, and how.
And I just don't understand why we haven't gotten to that point where we can actually implement that.
Well, you got to have people in power that have a desire to make that change. That's
I just
part
don't
of
see
the
why
problem.
not, because they would make so much more money.
Oh,
I think that they would make the federal government would have so much more money if they did the sales tax, even if they only charged 2% on everything that you purchase.
There's a lot of people above our pay grade keeping that from happening, though.
Oh,
A lot of people.
I don't buy into all those conspiracy theories.
It's not conspiracy theory. It's true. I mean, there are people that that honestly that do well. They profit from it. Well, I mean,
How?
How could
they possibly profit from that versus sales tax?
Let's break it down to a level that's a little closer to our territory. CPAs.
Oh, well, see, but that's the thing, is that you really wouldn't get rid of the CPAs, because companies still have to have bookkeepers.
Sure.
They still have to have somebody that's going to keep them in regulations with the
Sure.
SEC. You know, I mean, so there's some, and
Something's
companies
still
that
gotta
are
happen,
publicly traded companies are still going to have to,
Yeah.
take care of their books, because they have to report their earnings to their shareholders.
True.
So I don't think that whole industry would just disappear overnight.
No, but it
would just change the dynamic.
It would change. It would have to change dramatically for some people.
It would change their schooling for sure, and I think that a lot of people that are wouldn't probably need a 4-year degree, or maybe I don't know. I guess you could still take bookkeeping in 4 years, but there's only so much math you can do without messing it up.
Well, speaking of housing, we had a really horrible event happen in the last several days. There was a lot of storms and a
tornadoes.
Very devastating tornado in Kentucky. They said it stayed on the ground for about 200 miles. This thing was probably in excess of a mile wide. Wind speeds approaching 300 miles per hour.
Wow.
I don't know what they've classified it yet as, EF4 or EF5. If this wasn't an EF5, I don't know what would be. And it was a very, very deadly and devastating storm. One of the things that happens, in addition to the tragic loss of life and the injuries and all that, but also the loss of housing.
Oh, yeah. Like, how many houses did it affect you?
I don't know exactly, but I know it's a bunch. If something stays on the ground for 200 miles, it's going to tear a lot of things up. And you're going to lose a lot of structures, both residential and commercial, in all likelihood. Farming operations. I mean, you've got all sorts of structures that are affected by a storm of that magnitude. Something that strong is going to do a lot of damage in a hurry. We experienced something very similar here over 40 years ago in Wichita Falls.
1978, right?
April of 79.
79.
And it was the big Red River Valley tornado outbreak. Wichita Falls, Seymour, Vernon, and Lawton, Oklahoma. All of us were hit by tornadoes that day. And the one that hit Wichita Falls left 20% of our population homeless.
Wow.
20% of this city's population had their homes destroyed or heavily damaged such that they could no longer live in them. And
I know that there's a lot of newer homes in that Floral Heights area too.
You've got it's
built in the 70s versus the original ones.
Yeah, Faith Village. Faith Village was pretty much flattened by that tornado. That area was just almost totally devastated, and it took years. And there's still a couple places where you drive by and you see a slab there, where people just chose not to rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
It was just too much for them. When things like this happen, Lou, it really has a deep impact on the market in many ways, doesn't it?
It does, because, now you got a bunch of displaced family members, or human beings. And then so the economy there in that area is going to have an effect, because now they got less businesses, less jobs.
Yeah.
And less people to work those jobs.
Right. Well,
so they're going to have to relocate to somewhere else temporarily, and that's going to create a pressure on their housing system.
Yeah. And
so
there's
the people that are in Kentucky are going to relocate somewhere.
Sure. And
like
you
saw in Louisiana when Hurricane Katrina, all of those people that were in Katrina had to be housed somewhere else. And so they went all over the place. They went all over the country.
The Houston area inherited a lot of people as a result of Katrina. There were a lot of families that relocated to the Houston area, Corpus Christi area, San Antonio, parts of South Texas, and never went back. So yeah, when you have a storm like that, you have that kind of damage. The market is obviously the lives are affected. I mean that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. But the market itself gets so upset that it's going to take you. Well, it'll take you at least a couple of years, I would think,
to rebuild,
to really rebuild and recover. Our friends, and we have some neighbors a lot closer than Kentucky, Moore, Oklahoma. Well, they really know what this is like.
Oh yeah, Moore, Oklahoma.
My brother
actually was stationed there for a while.
Yeah, they've been hit so many times in the last 15, 20 years. And it's weird because you look at a map of Moore, and they have NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have this map that shows you the tornado paths over the years.
Right.
And literally, it's like within a 15-mile stretch, they're all right there in the same little area of Moore.
And people keep rebuilding in that same area.
People keep rebuilding, and I really wonder why some people keep going back there, but
I think it was
God love them.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember exactly what year it was. It was either 2010, 11, somewhere around there, when there was a big tornado over there in Moore, Oklahoma.
I think 2011 sounds right.
Yeah, my brother was stationed there at Tinker, and he lived in Moore, and his house was not hit.
Yeah.
But the house right next door was hit.
Yeah. And you see that a lot.
Like and the destruction on one side of the street was just just gone.
Oh,
and then the other side of the street was just perfectly fine.
Well, we experienced that here in 79 in Wichita Falls, is you had areas that, this house is completely gone, and the one right across the street has maybe half the roof torn off, but is otherwise intact and upright. Mm-hmm. And so, you're going to have this same situation. These tornadoes can happen anywhere, at any time. I know people saying
they call it an act of God. I mean,
it's December. Tornadoes don't happen in December. Yes, they do. They happen. They can happen any time of the year, anywhere, and this could happen to anybody, anywhere. And I think the area that we used to classify as Tornado Alley, which Wichita Falls used to be kind of the center of for many years, has now shifted north and east, and maybe even a little bit southeast. And we're seeing more and more storms of that type breaking out in places like in the Ohio River Valley and there in Kentucky and so forth. But what happened in Kentucky, that devastation is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a long time to clean that up and get those people back on their feet.
And they need to make sure that they have really good force majeure insurance.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, anyone, you got to have a good homeowner's policy.
Yeah.
You got to be
make
protected.
Sure that you have some sort of, we call it in real estate, we call it force majeure, but
right.
It's basically translated to the act of God. Mm-hmm. Most insurance companies will have some sort of clause for natural disasters.
Right.
So you really have to make sure that put that in there, because normally they won't include it. That's why a lot of times when there's fires or floods and stuff like that, the insurance companies can wiggle out of paying because it's not included in your standard policy.
Well, and I know, obviously if you
have additional addendums.
Right. Well, obviously if you finance a home through a bank or a credit union or any kind of mortgage lender, you're going to have hazard insurance because the lender wants to be protected, same as you do. They want to know that if something, if something destroys that home, fire, flood, tornado, whatever it may be, they want to.
Yeah, but there's different levels that you really have to make sure to talk to your insurance agent and make sure that you're covered for those specific things.
And that's where I was going with this is you have to make sure that your coverage is adequate. That you are, like, for example, your standard homeowners policies don't cover floods. That requires flood insurance. Your standard homeowners policy doesn't protect you against flood damage.
Right.
So you have to have a separate policy, and that's all administered, I guess, through FEMA.
FEMA administers whether it's in a flood zone.
Yeah, National Flood Insurance Program.
Yeah, and what level of flood insurance you would be required is based on whether it's in the 100-year plain, in the 500-year plain, or in the 50. So there's different levels of it. Yeah. So depending on those levels and how much of your property is in the flood zone or the floodway, they even have different words for it. So, you just have to find – most of the time, if you want to purchase a home that is in the floodway or if it is in the flood zone, unless you're paying cash for it, you're going to have some sort of flood insurance, and you need to find out what the elevation is. I mean, there's a little bit more involved in it.
Yeah, and
you want to get a discount on that insurance, because it can be pretty pricey.
Yeah, we had a situation where we were looking at a home here in Wichita Falls that it turned out had been constructed in what is now a floodway. Now, when the home was built, that designation didn't exist for that area.
Right.
Those FEMA flood maps came into being
after 79.
Yeah, probably.
I'm sure.
Probably, I think they were redrawn in like the mid 80s. It seems like, or something like that. And that area, because of a canal that was close by, was designated a floodway. And at that point, I wasn't sure what a floodway was. I knew what the 100-year floodplain was and the 500-year floodplain. But I went to the city planning people and said, "What is this?" Because I knew they had the flood maps, and they would know what the most current information was.
It just means that that's where the water is going to drain.
What they told me at that time, I don't know if the rules have changed since then or not, but at that time they told me that by the strictest rules that FEMA has, you're not supposed to build anything in a floodway. You're not even supposed to plant a tree in a floodway.
There are, like, if it's red, like if you look at a FEMA map, if it's in the red zone, you're not supposed to plant anything there or build anything there.
Yeah, because it'll disrupt the flow.
That's gonna be the flow of the flood.
Right.
So you don't want anything in that, in that flow. Yeah. So there's certain pieces of land that people aren't able to actually construct, like contractors won't even build a house on it.
We were kind of shocked and stunned at this whole floodway thing, and that killed that deal. It did. Yeah. And then I started doing more homework and more research on flood zones and FEMA and how all this stuff works. And and certainly you're probably going to have some of those folks in Kentucky that are going to run into that may have had their homes destroyed, and
when FEMA goes back in and redraws the maps, they do have to redraw them at some point.
And it's like are you going to be able to rebuild anything there? At that point, so there's all sorts of potential obstacles, I guess might be the right word for it, that you need to look at when you're buying or building a home. That you need to look at, be aware of. And whenever someone calls me about a property, whether they want to list it or whether they want to buy something, whatever, the first thing, one of the first things I go in and look at is it in a flood zone?
Yes,
because that's going to have an impact.
Most of the time, whenever we go to list a property, the current owners will know if it's in a flood zone or not, and they'll tell you. Sometimes they forget, and it does, and we find out about it later or after the fact. Like when you go to get your insurance, the insurance company will tell you if it's in the flood zone.
Well, if you've got a current survey, the survey, it's going to say on that map, what the flood zone designation is. Ideally, you want to be in zone X, which is, you're not in the 100-year or the 500-year.
Yeah, they do have different zones. Yeah. It gets complicated.
Oh,
so
it does.
It's difficult to explain to a layman with complete confidence.
You almost need to see it laid out in front of you on paper,
exactly,
to really be able to absorb it.
And one thing that we do advise is if your house is in the floodway or in the flood, well, if it's in the floodway, you're kind of SOL. But if it's in the flood zone, have the elevation certificate reissued, because sometimes that can make a big difference on the type of. They can find out that really the only place affected is a little corner on the back portion of the property, and it doesn't even affect the structure. So your insurance premium is going to be a lot lower.
And that's where you'll have a surveyor will come out and survey the property, and with their equipment, they'll determine the elevation of the property. And
it's been such a long time since I've done one in a flood zone that I don't remember exactly who you need to go to in order to get a new certificate of elevation certificate. But if I remember correctly, the insurance can help you out with that.
Yeah.
It's not something that we do as real estate agents. It's something that somebody else needs to do. And I cannot remember for the life of me. I'll have to do some research on it.
Well, I know.
Get back to you on that. But I'm pretty sure that the research, the certificate, the elevation certificate is done through the insurance company.
Yeah. The one and only time that I had to have flood insurance, absolutely had to have flood insurance, it was the insurance company. They said, "Hey, we're going to send so and so out to do this."
Right. If I remember correctly, that's who they do it. Is if you want them to re-inspect that property, that they send out an insurance adjuster to take a look at because they study the map, they study the house itself, and they do some measurements and stuff, and they figure out how many inches above the ground it needs to be in order to be outside of the flood zone.
Right.
Because it's kind of like the houses over on our neighborhood that floods a lot. My brain just went completely bonkers. Tanglewood.
Oh, yeah.
Tanglewood floods a lot. So a lot of those homes are actually in the flood zone.
Yes.
I think a lot of them on, what's that one that starts with an S? I can never.
Don't give me the lion here.
It's like a Hispanic name, and
I know. I can see the street in my mind.
Yeah.
I can see the houses.
Shady Lane. Is it Shady? Shady Lane?
It might be Shady.
There's a street that some of the houses are on the flood zone, and some of them aren't because the elevation in the ground. Like some of them,
it's a very hilly area.
Yeah,
very hilly. And,
so if it was built on the hill, then you're not going to be in the flood zone.
Yeah.
However, a corner of your yard might be because it got wet.
if it's down there and your house is way back, it could be. But the point to all this discussion being, any natural disaster, and especially tornadoes that destroy very large areas, that's going to have a significant impact on not only the supply of housing, but also on values too. I mean, it can have a significant impact, and so you really don't know. It will take years to really figure out how this has really affected them. I think it takes a while. The market does kind of reset a little bit when something like this happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a really good look at Austin, for instance, and Houston, whenever we had those floods back in what was it, like 2014, 15, somewhere around there, when the drought went away, overnight it went away. Yeah, couple of days of rain, and the whole world flooded in Texas.
We went from no water to more water than we could stand.
We were in Category 5 of the flood of the drought. You could barely even take a shower.
Yeah. Well, we were approaching, and during that drought, we were approaching the point where we were close to losing a couple of major industries here.
Yeah, the base I think was even starting to talk about actually relocating.
What do we do? And
that was crazy.
When things like that happen, you talk about affect property values. The last thing you want to do is start hemorrhaging major industries, manufacturers, or a military base. In our case, Shepherd Air Force Base here is such a huge part of the economy.
Oh yeah, it's one of the reasons why we even exist. But
second or third largest employer in the city.
Right. Yeah. So. But what I was saying about that though is that it got to the point where people were actually considering moving out of Wichita Falls. I think we lost a pretty good, significant amount of population. Yeah. Our just because I was a real estate agent at that time, the amount of listings that we had in MLS was just overwhelming.
Right.
We had 900 plus active listings, which right now the thought of that is just like it boggles the mind.
Staggering.
Yeah, it boggles the mind. Right now we have 180 versus when we were in the drought, there was 900, almost 1,000 listings in Wichita Falls.
We would love to have more than 180.
Yes, just a few more, maybe up to 500. If we're more than 500, then we get a little squirrely.
Yeah.
But, there was so many people leaving that their houses were staying on the market for 6 months.
Yeah. Well, then you get a glut of inventory. You get a glut of inventory.
So much inventory. We had an oversaturation. So there was a bit of a depression when it came to the sales price. If you wanted to sell your house, you had to like discount it another $20,000-$30,000, to entice people to buy your house. But as soon as that drought lifted, as soon as we were flooding the streets with water, that market just started to go up and up and up. Well, not nearly as fast or as much as it has since the beginning of January, but it definitely did see a significant amount of people were starting to say, "Oh, okay, now we're okay. Everything's fine now, y'all.
Yeah, calm down.
Calm down. Let's go and buy a house instead of just renting for, giving people your money."
And there's a lot of factors that affect housing prices and market values and so forth that we can control as human beings. Quality of life issues, certain amenities in your city or whatever. We can control all that stuff. But when it comes to the weather, we can't control any of that.
It's something that anybody can control. No. Like right now, our weather is crazy. I can hear the wind out there.
Yes,
it's nuts.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't think that's going to hurt our property values because it's temporary. But when you have a natural disaster like a years-long drought like we endured here, or a major tornado.
It was about 4 or 5 years worth
of
a drought. It was
actually
from the time,
closer to 7.
8 or 9.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Closer to 7.
It was like 8 or 9 when I got here.
Yeah.
And that drought lasted until it was about 15?
May of 2015 is when we finally broke out of it. And in the course of about...
And people were saying, "Oh, Wichita Falls is dead. It's never coming back," and this and that and the other.
Well, Lou, I remind people.
Give it a second.
Wait, it'll change, number one. Number two, remember, when your ancestors settled this state, there was one natural, and there remains one naturally occurring lake in all of Texas, and that's Caddo Lake in East Texas. That is the only naturally occurring lake in this state. Every other lake in the state of Texas is a man-made reservoir.
Wow.
Period. They all are.
So we were more deserty than we are now.
It was, believe me, I'm a fifth-generation Texan. When my ancestors came here, this was
first-generation Puerto Rican.
This was a hard, dadgum place to live when they first got here. Living here was tough. It challenged you. They survived it, and so will we.
Oh, yeah.
We have a lot more modern resources and rescue options at our disposal. I kept telling people, don't panic. As long as Walmart can get a truck in here with bottled water, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
When Walmart closes down, then we can have a conversation about whether you need to relocate.
Yes. But, you're not going to die of thirst.
No.
You might not get a shower, but you ain't going to die of thirst. So.
It was crazy. I mean, they were even fining people for throwing water on their plants.
Oh, yeah. Well, you couldn't water your lawn. You couldn't wash your car in the driveway.
A pot from your house. Like if you went inside and I got a pot of water and it was just going to water your plants.
The water well industry exploded here for a few years. I mean, exploded.
Yep. My son was actually, he did the hydro wells.
Oh, yeah.
Can't remember exactly what he called it, but they would do the hydro ACs and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those. Yeah, I know the ones you're talking about. It's a geothermal type stuff.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Geothermal systems. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
But anyway.
All right. Well, we're out of time for this show.
We could just keep talking.
We could go on for another hour, but
I know.
You don't.
Real estate's fun.
You don't want to do that. So anyway, if you're looking to list a home to sell, if you need to buy a home, we would love to help you out. StrategicRealty.net is our website. You can go and check out the inventory that we have there right now available. You can reach out to us. You can contact us by phone by calling
940-689-7900.
She got it. And again, strategicrealty.net is our website. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to list your home or help you buy a new home. Whatever it is you're doing, no matter where you're relocating from, we can help you out. And
or you're relocating too. We have the ability to list or sell or help you buy a home in all of northern Texas.
That's right. So reach out to us. Until next time. Another episode of Strategic Moves with Lou coming up very soon.